Welcome to the Cash Car Convert Podcast, episode number 26.
You're listening to the Cash Car Convert Podcast with James Kinson.
Hello and welcome to the Cash Car Convert Podcast. My name is James Kinson and I am the Cash Car Convert. This is the podcast where cash cars are cool and auto debt is dangerous to your financial future. Now, in this episode, I just want to give you a little warning here. This continues to be a clean podcast, but this episode does have discussions about death and cancer, so I just wanted to prepare you for that. So I want to start today by telling you that, I've been thinking a lot about how so often people look at their life circumstances and they think they're insurmountable and they can't find a way out, and it just seems like too much. And, I know I've shared my story of how, I had some issues in my life. I had some challenges that I had to overcome. But, maybe there is somebody out there listening who said, well, I had a bigger challenge than that, or my challenges are bigger than that. And therefore, what you're telling me doesn't matter. It doesn't resonate. It's not relevant to me. And therefore, I'm in a different place. You can't help me, kind of a thing. So I started thinking about that, and I thought about it long and hard, and I decided that I knew somebody who had been through a circumstance that maybe some of you out there have been through something worse, but not many. So I wanted to bring this person on and have them talk about what they went through and how they came through it, the mental state that they had while they were going through it, how they recovered on the back end, and all those kinds of things. So. And it was also kind of funny because this person's somebody very close to me. I've known them, all of their life. And so it was kind of a no-brainer to make the call. And I'm going to ask you to, after we wrap up the interview and the music cues up to close the show, there's going to be an extra little bit of this story about how this call, got set up and who got involved in setting it up. And that'll be at the very tail end of the episode today. So with that, let me welcome my guest today. This is my sister. Her name is Beverly Vaughan. We live here in the same city of Fort Worth. Beverly, welcome to the show.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
You're welcome. Glad to have you on. Beverly, what was your first car? How did you get it? And how did it work out for you?
I was hoping you would ask me that question. Okay, it was actually a 1972 Volkswagen Beetle. That was a hand-me-down from you, actually. And our parents had given me the right to choose any color I wanted to get it painted as it became mine. And I got it painted baby blue, metal flake, and with a white stripe along the bottom of the door. And there was a little quirk with this car that a lot of people didn't know about, and the heater didn't work too well. Well, so when I would be going to work or school, at the red lights, I would hold my breath because I didn't want people to know how cold it was actually inside the car. So it was a kind of funny little quirk about the car. I didn't want to blow smoke inside the car and let them know really how cold I was inside the car.
That is pretty funny. And I do remember that car. And I also remember that when I was driving it prior to you, that it was a car that was very, very, I drove it during some very, very cold weather. So I'm glad that worked out well for you and that I was able to hand it down. I should add that when I drove it, it had a dent in the front fender, which you had repaired when it was painted, I believe. And therefore you were able to have a much nicer car than the one I handed down to you. So.
It was actually like brand new. They had sent it to a body shop and they had given me a binder of so many colors, and I actually got to choose the exact color that I wanted. It took me days just to decide that after I decided on the color and that I wanted a pinstriping along the bottom of the door and got it done. It became mine very quickly, and I thought I was one of the cool kids in school. Driving a little 72 Volkswagen that was just shiny and looked brand new.
No, it did. They did do a really good job on it, and it was very nice. So I'm glad you were able to take advantage of that. Let me jump into the reason you're on the show, and I guess I want you to tell them what happened, what you were diagnosed with, and how the diagnosis was done. But, before you do that, kind of lay out what your life was like at that time. What year are we talking about, and some of those kinds of things. Just give us some background on what, where you were in your life at that point.
Right. It was 1988. I was married and had a little girl that was 4 years old, and I was happy in my life, happy-go-lucky, thinking everything was going as I had planned. Little did I know that my life was going to take a big change for the difference.
So take us through now what events led to you being diagnosed, and again, how was that diagnosis done?
Okay. I woke up one morning and I was actually in a pool of blood, and I was taken to the emergency room by my husband, and the ER doctor had determined that I had a mass inside of me, and they were wondering if it could be a fetus. Well, at the time I was trying to get pregnant, and I said, yes, it definitely could have been a fetus. And upon further examination, they decided that it wasn't, that it was a tumor. And they did a biopsy of the tumor and determined it after the biopsy that it was non-cancerous. Well, due to the fact that the biopsy had been frozen prior to the lab getting it, it changed composition of the tumor. They actually did the surgery and went ahead and removed the tumor, and the tumor came back positive for cancer of the uterus.
So they went in, they did a biopsy, and they sent a piece off to get it tested, and that came back negative for being any kind of malignancy. And then you went in for surgery to have the mass removed, the tumor. And when they sent the tumor off, then they told you at that point that you had cancer. So how did that play out, and how much time elapsed from the time you were told, they did the frozen biopsy, and the time that they told you that you had cancer, and how was that done?
They did the removal of the tumor, and I was recuperating at home from that, thinking at that point that it was still non-malignant and that there was no cancer. And so at that point, I had made an appointment to go back to the doctor 2 weeks later. And when I got to the doctor, they told me that, they asked actually if I had anyone else with me. And I said, yes, my husband and my daughter. And they said, could you bring them in the office and so we can talk to all three of you together? And so I did. I went out and got my husband and Kimberly, my daughter, and brought them into the office. And at that time, the doctor told me that the tumor had came back from the lab and that it was cancer of the uterus. And at that point, he was telling me that it's something that women over 65 normally have, and they were pulling magazine articles about it. There wasn't a whole lot known other than it was a grim prognosis, and at that point, he gave me 5-year survival with or without chemo and radiation, but at a later date, they said 6 months survival.
Yes. Okay. So let's back up. So let's frame this for everybody who's listening. 1988, the internet wasn't readily available to people. People didn't, for the most part, have home computers. And so really going to magazine articles or going to a library was really the only way you could research things. Nobody had smartphones to be able to do things. In fact, most people didn't have cell phones at that point, only, executives and the Wall Street types. So we're talking about a very different world than where we are today, and with much more limited access to information. So you were diagnosed with uterine cancer. The doctor who did the surgery told you that it was a 5-year survival rate with or without any kind of therapy. And then subsequently, he recommended you go to an oncologist who at that point told you that you had about 6 months to live. Is that the way it played out?
Correct. That's exactly the way it played out. And in my mindset, I was thinking they removed the tumor. I no longer had cancer in my body, and I didn't even know why I was there at the oncologist's office. And I was really not listening to a thing he had to say. And so the oncologist looked at my husband and he said, take her home, bring her back when she's ready to listen. When I got home, I looked at the picture of my daughter that I had hanging on the wall, and I said, how can I not do everything possible to be here for this little girl and all the events that are going to happen in her life? And so I went back to the oncologist the next day and said, let's do what we got to do and get it done.
So when you got the initial diagnosis, for 2 weeks you were thinking, okay, it's non-malignant, and now you come in and he tells you that you have cancer, 5-year survival rate. Did he tell you at that time you had 6 months, or was that when you met with the oncologist?
That was later when I went to the oncologist. The actual OBGYN, he actually wrote it on a piece of paper. He put 5-year survival. He put a plus or minus sign, and then he put chemo and radiation.
How was that when you got that news? I mean, I can only think of it, sort of as a punch in the gut. I mean, I've had a few times where I've gotten some really bad news, and that's kind of the best way I can describe it. But what was it like for you going in there thinking you were just getting a follow-up from surgery and then getting this 5-year sentence put on your life?
It wasn't good. As I walked back to the car, I felt numb. I felt like somebody, like you say, had hit me in my stomach. And I went home. I made a few phone calls to tell family and friends, and basically laid down on the bed and had decided, my life was over. I mean, that's what I knew about cancer. And at that point, I didn't have a whole lot of strength. I was a faithful person, but I was just defeated at that point in the beginning. And people came over and they brought flowers and they would talk about me as she was such a good person, and I'm laying there thinking I'm still a good person. It's just I've got a fight on my hands. And so it kind of took me to a place of depression and self-pity, and I was trying to really, because I'm a strong person, and I knew in my logical mind that to beat this, I was going to have to shake that off and have a different frame of mind. So there was at one point I was sitting in the middle of the bed and I had been crying and I had really been feeling sorry for myself, and the other side of me came out, and I was saying, God, you give people signs. I want to see one of these signs. I'm angry and I need you right now, and I need your strength. And I knew that I had to get my mind off of myself. And I thought about a book that I had received as a gift whenever I had my hysterectomy. And I went in the living room, I got the book, and I went back to the bed, and I sat on the bed, and I opened the book, and on the cover page, it was a Danielle Steele novel. It's called Crossing. And on the cover page, it says, strong people cannot be defeated. And at that point, I ripped out the page and I said, thank you, God. And I knew that that was his sign, and that indeed I had to be strong, and that if I had been the weak person that was just wallowing in her self-pity, that it could take me, but I was going to give it a challenge, and I had my mental frame of mind had just been changed, and a strong part of me came out, and I was ready to fight. So
at that point, your life had gone from, you were trying to have another child, and then you have to have a hysterectomy, which means you're not going to have any more children. And then on top of that, they're telling you you're only going to live another 5 years, plus or minus, whether you have therapy or not. And then, so subsequent to that, you go to the oncologist, and he gives you even a more grim diagnosis, as you stated earlier, of only having 6 months to live. And I remember that part very vividly. I remember, feeling like that was no time at all. And let's frame it for people. How old were you at the time of this diagnosis? I
was 28 years old. And like I said, I had a 4-year-old. a husband, and, we were a good family, and, we just lived our day-to-day life, and of course this wasn't in our plans, and so I knew at that point that my life was fixing to change, and that I had to do everything I could to be there for my daughter, and so I was ready to fight.
Yeah, so you mentioned that when you were in the oncologist's office that he was talking and telling you things that you were gonna have to do to fight cancer. What kinds of things was he telling you, and what was going through your head when he didn't think you were paying attention?
Yes, he was telling me that it was going to be a really hard, difficult road, that he was going to push my body to its limits, and that I was going to be in the hospital 1 week out of every month for 6 months. I was going to take 6 weeks of intense radiation, and then I was going to have what is termed as brachytherapy, which is a radioactive implant, and I was going to have it implanted inside me for 48 hours. And at that point, in my mind, I could see my daughter being afraid of me. I would be losing my hair. He had been talking about me possibly wearing a pouch with the chemo in it, and I was going to have a portacath, and I knew there would be wires coming out of me and wigs involved, and the first thing I thought of course, was about Kimberly and how she would react to me, and I really thought she would be scared and afraid of me for everything I was fixing to have to go through. I thought she would look at me like I was a monster.
Okay, so at that point, you were thinking about her reaction, and you were thinking, I'm not sure I can do this because I don't want my daughter to think that about me, right?
Right.
So then the doctor says, go home, you're not listening, and you go home.
Yeah.
And then you took us through a bit of it, and I kind of interrupted you. So take me back through. Now you're at home, and what happened that changed your mind about that?
Well, on the ride home, I was very quiet, and I was just thinking, everything that, kind of trying to process what I had heard. And but I was still thinking to myself, I don't know why he has me here. I don't know why he's talking to me, because they took the tumor out. And that was my mindset at that time. And like you say, this was 1998. I had took a kind of a back seat to my own diagnosis just by thinking that what I don't know won't hurt me. And so I didn't do as much research as I would do now. I was 28 years old. I didn't have access to the internet. I would have had to go to the library. And I just really thought in my case that what I didn't know wouldn't hurt me. And if I read that I was going to have symptoms, that in fact I might. And so I went ahead and I went home, and I walked in the door, and I had a big picture. It's an 11 by 14 picture of Kimberly on the wall. And that picture just like had a glow around it when I walked in the door. And I said, how can I not be there and do everything possible for this little 4-year-old girl? She needs me. I want to be there. I want to see her get married. I want to see her have babies. This is part of my life plan. And so at that point, I was prepared to do whatever it took and fight, and do exactly as the doctor had asked me to do. And that's when I went back to the doctor the next day to do whatever you have to do.
Okay. And just a correction, you said 1998, but it was 1988. Okay. So then you went back to the oncologist, and you were ready to listen and ready to do whatever it takes to survive. So what was the next step that you had to do?
He wanted me to start chemo right away.
Okay. So what's right away? Is that like a week, 2 weeks, a month? I mean, did he have you start the next week, or? Within
2 weeks. Not a whole lot of time to process it. I had my hysterectomy, and right after that, when I had my appointment with him, and it was very immediate that he wanted to get me back in his office and get the portacath put in to where I could start my treatments at the hospital immediately.
Okay. And actually, let me go back to something, because you mentioned having the hysterectomy, and I didn't really go into why that happened. I mean, you had uterine cancer, so to get the mass out and to give you the best chances of survival, I'm assuming that was why they did that. I didn't ask about the rationale for that.
cancer returning and coming back to the same place that that originated was very high. And so they were going to not give that cancer that option. They were going to take everything out of me and clean me out to where the cancer couldn't come back to a uterus, an ovary, or anything.
Okay, so now you're doing the chemo, and so they've done the things to get you prepped for that, the port and those kinds of things. So take us through, what that was like to start the chemo. And again, I'm gonna reiterate here for listeners that this was 1988. There's been a lot of changes where the therapies and the chemotherapies and the radiations and so forth are much more targeted now, and not that they're fun, but they weren't targeted as much then as they are now, and so therefore the repercussions of them were worse. So with that as the backdrop, go ahead and tell your story.
I would go into the hospital. I'd be in the hospital a week out of every month. And whenever I would go in the hospital, I would prepare my room, and I would take my picture of my daughter and my husband, and I would take my sign from God. That was my laminated piece of the Danielle Steele novel that I ripped out, and I had put it in a frame, and the strong people cannot be defeated, and I would put it on one nightstand. And I would just prepare my room for my stay and try to make it a positive place for me to be. I knew I would be there for a week, and I wanted it to feel as positive as possible.
I think that was really smart that you put familiar things out there. You put things that gave you a reason to live and gave you a positive attitude. And, I hear these days that some people use Pinterest, or they'll use a pegboard of some sort, and they'll create what we call vision boards. And it's kind of that same kind of thing. It's your why. It's why are you doing what you're doing? Where do you want to go? And in this case, you wanted to go back home to your daughter, and you had that mantra of strong people cannot be defeated, to help you remember. Every time you saw that, you were drawn back to that message from God that you were going to make it, and if you stayed strong. So obviously the chemo wasn't fun. What were some of the side effects that you felt from those 1 week stays?
I would be very, very, very sick. Very, very weak. Of course, I was losing my hair, and you just, it's hard to stay positive when the person that you see in the mirror is a shadow of the person that you have been before. And, I would just, look at it long term and try to see the light at the end of the tunnel and say, yes, this year is going to be a bad year, but after this, everything's going to be okay. And I wouldn't focus on the 6 months. I would focus on a year or more for my mindset.
I'm reminded, I've heard Joel Osteen tell the story of his mother battling cancer, and she too was given a death sentence with her cancer. And one of the things that she did, because of exactly what you're talking about, where you, when you look in the mirror, you're not the person that looks healthy and vibrant and like they're going to make it. She actually put photographs around the house of her when she was young and fit and vibrant. Did you do anything like that?
Well, for me, I was still mom, and so that didn't stop just because I had the diagnosis of cancer. And so for me, it was my daughter, and when I got home, no matter how sick I was, I still had to be mom, and that would kind of take me out of myself and put me in a different place to where I had to be strong and just keep going for my daughter, Kimberly. She was 4, and she needed her mom on a daily basis. And when I was there for her, I would do everything I could to just try to be the person I was without the chemo. No matter how I felt, I kept going. She was modeling for a dress shop at the mall, and I would take her up to the mall, and I would barely be able to walk in. I was so tired. But I would make sure her hair was just perfect, and I just kept being mom, and I think really that helped me get through it because I had to take my mind off of myself and devote it to her.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. And yeah, I think that is important. You had that as a distraction, so you couldn't think about yourself all the time. You were thinking about her. And, my recollection from that time period probably isn't as good as yours about these specific events, for sure. But I don't remember Kimberly having any really negative side effects from you going through this. So the fears you had on the front end about her being afraid of you or having issues with you going through your treatment and some of the things that they might have to do, did any of those things come to fruition in any way?
No, not at all. It was the exact opposite. She would want to help me with heparin injections that I would have to put in my portacath on a nightly basis to keep it from forming a blood clot. And she would want to push the syringe in and help me. And she would say, "Mom, let me put your wig up for you." And she never once thought anything different other than I was just Mom. And I mean, that was my biggest fear, is that I would scare her, but instead it was like it never even fazed her. I was still just Mom.
That's great. And that's the way I remember it, but I just wanted to make sure that you didn't have a different recollection or more private moments that weren't that way. So, and it sounds like you tried really hard to keep her life as normal as possible, so that she wasn't impacted, other than when you had to go in for your week and some of those kinds of things that just flat couldn't be helped. So we talked a little bit about what the chemo did. What about the radiation? How did that work, and what were the side effects from that, if they were different in any way?
The side effects for radiation were actually, for me, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, because I had played it up in my head that this was going to be a huge thing. I had heard so much about radiation from people that I knew, and so I had a different idea of what it would be, and I would go in there, and they had marked me with the purple dye, and it stays on your skin, and it gets on the clothes that you wear and everything. But for me, I had it done, on my stomach, and it wasn't bad. It was more like a sunburn. It wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't anything near what I had thought in my mind that it was going to be. The hardest thing for me was going to the radiologist's office and seeing the children that were there, that were also going through the same thing. And I would think to myself that I would take it many times over to keep from having them to have to take it. And so the hardest part for me was seeing the other people that were there in the waiting room while I was waiting for my treatment. Wow.
Yeah, I can't imagine. That's pretty hard for children to go through something like that, for sure. I don't know much about radiation at all in terms of treatment, but I always think of chemotherapy as they're trying to give you just enough of the drug to kill the cancer, but not quite enough to kill you. And is that a pretty accurate way of looking at it?
Very accurate. And the way my doctor had described it is that each month when I started my treatment, that it would get more intense, and he was just going to push my body as far as it could go, take my white blood cell count down to 0. I had no immune system left, and he was going to do everything he could to fight this cancer. And yeah, you're exactly correct. It was not real pleasant.
Okay, and how long did you have to go through the chemo and radiation?
I did 6 months chemo, and that was 1 week out of every month. I would go into the hospital, I would check in, I would be in there for 7 days, and then I would leave there, and I'd be sick for 2 more weeks after that. So I would basically have 1 good week before it was time to do it again. The radiation started, and I had 6 weeks of going to radiation Monday through Friday. I would get Saturday and Sundays off, and then I would start the following Monday again. And then the radioactive implants that they had put inside me, I had for 48 hours, and I was unable to move during those 48 hours. A very uncomfortable position, and you're radioactive, so therefore people can't come around you because I could have made them sterile. And so I just had to have, there was a lot of alone time during that time, and not feeling so great and still kind of by yourself.
So how did you fight that mentally? Because, we talked about how you prepared the room when you had to go in for the chemo, but for the radiation, for the radioactive implant, where you had to be alone and still and all those things, how did you deal with that piece of it mentally?
I drew on my faith, and I knew during anything that had happened to me during that season of my life, I had different things that I would draw on. The footprints, I would definitely quote the footprints like I would be in the scans or different things, and I would say, I'm not alone. I know He's carrying me, and that helped. I would do the Lord's Prayer over and over and over again because, again, it made me not feel like I was alone. And even though it was a dark time, I just knew I wasn't alone. And so actually, I pulled on my faith and just remembered that if I did get weak at any point, and I did, I got very weak, but I knew that I had to stay as strong as my body would possibly let me, in order to fight this, and or else I wouldn't be here talking to you today. I had to keep a mental strength about me, and God played a big role in that. I mean, I was always, footprints. I was like, I'm not alone in here. He's carrying me in this most difficult time, and so a lot of it was just getting by faith.
This story obviously is kind of like the movie Titanic. We all know how it ends because you're here talking to us. And so the listeners know that you made it through. And the thing I want to kind of draw from this is you were given that 6-month diagnosis, and some people at that point may have thought, well, it's too much. Why would I go through chemo and radiation and be sick for those 6 months? If I'm only going to have 6 months to live, why don't I just live it? And you wouldn't be here if you hadn't made that choice, if you hadn't chosen to take on that challenge and know that you were going to push your body to the limit because you had a big enough why. Your daughter was your why. You wanted to see her get married. You wanted to see her have children. You wanted to be in her life. And that drove you to make the decisions you made that got you through that particular 6-month time period, right?
That was my driving force. Pretty much, I just wanted to share those moments with her that I had always dreamed of share. I mean, I had a little girl. I was like, this is just, perfect. And, I had dreams for her when she got older, and I just wanted to see her fulfill the dreams that I had for her. And with that grim diagnosis, it could have gotten me down really quickly. But I knew that beyond a shadow of a doubt, I kind of said, it will get me or I will get it. And so I would look and I would say, strong people cannot be defeated. And I would get that strength back. Even when I was at my sickest, I would quote that, and I would say, you're not going to get me. I'm planning on beating you on this one. And so I just kept a really, really positive attitude. And you had also given me a book that I read about positive mental attitude and how it played a big part in all aspects of your life. And so I kept thinking about the book and that it had positive influence. And so as sick as I could be, I just kept trying to be positive and keep a strong mental mind, because it really would be easy just to lay down and say, I can't do this anymore. But I didn't have that option. I had to fight.
Right. It's funny. I still remember the name of that book. It was Love, Medicine, and Miracles by Bernie Siegel. And he was a doctor, and he had been on Oprah Winfrey's show, talking about cancer and how a lot of people, the fight is just too hard. And so they ultimately lose that fight because it's just so hard, and they eventually just decide it's too hard and it's not worth the battle. And he was saying, if people make that choice, it's okay. It's, it's not a bad thing. It's just, because those of us who haven't gone through it, we can't really judge that. Whether we would be mentally and physically up to that task or not. But, Beverly obviously was. And I remember, having seen that, I got her that book as soon as I heard that she had cancer, and I gave it to her. And I'm really glad she read it, and I'm glad it was something that was positive in that experience.
and I tried to keep it as positive as possible, you know, and I had my extremely low moments to where I would, feel, like, you know, I can't do this, that even with the medicine that I'm taking, that, you know, either the cancer will get me or, the chemo will get me. And, I just really, you know, there are moments that you have to fight because your mind is just, you're human and you know, you start thinking those things, and I would say, no, you know, it can get me or I can get it. And in this instance, I'm not going to give up. And so, you know, I honestly believe that, you know, with faith and a strong mental health, that, and the driving force, my daughter was just everything to me. And between those three things, I knew beyond a shadow of doubt that I was going to make it at the end.
So let's fast forward a little bit now. So you've gone through the chemotherapy, you've gone through the radiation, you're on the other side of that. At what point did the doctors start to improve the diagnosis of your, you know, chances for survival and all those sort of things? How long did you have to live with that death sentence hanging over your head?
They do a 5-year survival, you know, with most cancer cases. And if you make it 5 years in remission, they say, you know, you're pretty good to go. And so I made it my 5 years, and on my 5-year anniversary, you know, I remember celebrating and thinking, okay, I've whooped this. But then in the back of my mind, you know, it's like you're a cancer patient every day. Even though the doctors start having better things for you, your outcome, I still, in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, but he told me 6 months, but he told me 6 months. And, sometimes it would get to me and I would just draw that strength back up and say, okay, I'm not going to let that happen. And it's actually in March of this year, it was 26 years.
Wow. Congratulations. That's fantastic. And, you know, to go from a 6-month sentence to having now lived an additional 26 years, you know, so let's not focus on the bad part of this anymore, and let's focus on the good part. What did you do after that? How did it change your life and your perspective, and what kind of things have you done to, you know, maybe give back or, you know, just what kind of things did you do?
You know, you just look at life differently. You notice things that you never noticed before, or maybe you noticed it in passing, but you really look at things now. I mean, my daughter, even as recent as yesterday, said, you know, Mom, because of what you went through and how you dealt with it, she said, I noticed the leaves on the trees and clouds and the sunsets and how bright they are and everything. And because that kind of thing, it definitely changed me, and it changed my attitude. I was a stronger person. I had been a little more timid before, and I was more one that I came out on the other side a stronger person with a stronger attitude, and so I was better for that too.
Yeah, I can certainly see that. And you know, you didn't have any more children, but you still love children a lot. So how did you deal with that?
My passion is children. They always have been. And I was less struggling. Why did he keep me? Why did God save me when so many don't have the outcome that I did? And, my inner self said, you know, your passion is children. He kept you here to make a difference in the lives of children. And so, you know, I worked in child care centers, at Baylor Hospital, and worked with, infants and toddlers, and, I would work with them on a daily basis and just try to do everything I could to make a difference in their lives.
That's great. No, and I knew that obviously, but I wanted to let the audience know that, you know, that you didn't have any more of your own children, but, you had a lot of other children that you were able to influence and be a part of their lives. There's something I didn't know until we spoke recently about this, and that is, that some people, and I don't know how you found out about this, but you can share with us that your case was so unusual that there are people who are going through their college studies who've written papers about your particular diagnosis and treatment.
Yeah, actually, in passing, my OBGYN actually had told me that he had been contacted in regards to some of the students at the University of North Texas Medicine, and that they were requesting information in reference to wanting to do term theme papers on me. Wow.
That's pretty wild, isn't it?
Yeah. I thought that was very interesting, and that was wonderful. I felt great about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just puts in context for the listener how unusual this is and what you did, how amazing it was, what a miracle it was, and just what it took for you to get through it. That it was such an anomaly that there are people who study this and write papers about it. So I mean, wow, that's really something.
I was shocked whenever he told me, because I thought, I'm just me, and I haven't changed that concept. I'm just me. And to think that somebody would actually want to do that, I can understand, because they're studying medicine. And I was baffled. It was abnormal case. And so I really, but still, for me, it was just, I'm just me.
And obviously, I just think of you as my sister. And honestly, I don't think a lot about what you went through and what you came through and how you survived, because, you survived and now you're here and you're living your life. And so those things don't occupy my mind. How do you view yourself? And do you still think about those days often?
I actually do. I live it on a daily basis. I know it's something that at some point, hopefully, I will get past, but it's just that, whenever somebody tells you you've got 6 months to live, then that is ingrained in your mind, and no matter the amount of medicine that you took or anything, I was told that it would come back, and when it came back, that it would go through my bloodstream, but through my bone marrow, and go to my major organs, and there would be no recovery from that. And so at that point, that scars you mentally. And so I still carry those scars. And if I get a cold or something, I'm like, I know it's back. But, so it's just more mind games than anything else, because I'm very healthy and I do well. It's just that is always in the back of your mind.
People listening, even today, she has doubts. She has thoughts about that time, and yet she knows that she's got to change that voice in her head and turn it around. And to me, I think that's the big key. I mean, obviously the chemo and the radiation did their job, but I think being able to control that internal voice and to realize that no matter what you're facing, again, I want to turn this back now to the listener and say, if you're facing a debt problem that you think is insurmountable, or you've got a situation at work that you think is insurmountable, or you're in a relationship and you think that issue is insurmountable, it's not. There are ways that you can work to improve yourself and your life. And, very few people are going to be in situations worse than what my sister was in when she got that diagnosis. And if she can battle back from that with incredible odds against her, and claw her way back to a life that is normal, and that, nobody in the outside world, when they see her walking around, realizes what she went through, how strong she had to be to make that journey. So, I wanted this to be an episode where it's very clearly stated that, your mental toughness matters. And if you don't think you're mentally tough, then start reading books about how to change that mindset, how to change that recording in your head, because we all deal with it. There's nobody out there, the most successful person has doubts. It's just they have a way of dealing with them. They change the voice inside their head. So, Beverly, anything you want to say to listeners about how you did that, and any tips or tricks that you have that you might want to share with them?
I just live my life on a daily basis. I look at everything around me and how I've been so blessed. It's like, how can you go to that negative place that you were once before? I just feel like you just have to, and if it's reading books or whatever it is, to pull yourself up out of that spot and just get back to where you once were, because, we're strong people, and, everybody goes through something that's going to take them into a deep, dark place. But you just got to know that your mind plays an awful big role on your physical being, and as long as you can keep your mental health and feel strong, and people do it in different ways. If it's by reading a book and that makes you feel, gives you pointers on how to be strong and how to use your mental strength to help you, then do that. Go out for a walk, get out of the house. It's whatever you need to do. Everybody has different ways of handling things, but it's whatever you need to do to pull yourself out of that dark spot, even if it's for an hour. It gets you to a different spot and a brighter spot. And, sometimes that's all it takes is just a few minutes of thinking differently and thinking positively that can change a negative thought.
I've always believed that you got to have a positive attitude, and it's not to be Pollyannish, but because there's power in the way it affects your mentality. But there's no doubt if you had a negative mindset, you wouldn't be talking to me today. I have no doubt about that, and so I think that's a really big key here for people that to keep that positive mindset, work on on the things that you need to do to get you where you want to be. And I think the number one thing, you got to have a big enough why. Maybe you don't want to get out of debt for you, or maybe you don't want to quit smoking for you, or whatever else it might be, or whatever other problem you might have in your life. But, would you do it for your children, right? If you've got debt today, and auto debt that I always talk about, if you've got auto debt, would you give it up so you can send your child to college? Would you give it up so that you yourself can retire in dignity? Those are the questions, I think, those big why questions, that drive people to doing extraordinary things and making extraordinary changes in their life. So, Beverly, I appreciate you being on and sharing your story. I know that's a very personal story, and, I had reservations about asking you to go public with this, just because I know how difficult it can be to share things, out like this. And I've put myself out there with this Cash Car Convert podcast, so I've kind of accepted that I'm willing to do that to a certain extent. But you hadn't signed up for that, so I really appreciate you being willing to come on and share your story. I think it's going to inspire some people and help them to believe they can do what they need to.
It's my pleasure, James. And I wanted to leave you with a plaque that I have that says what cancer can't do. And I believe in this aspect that anybody in any circumstance can replace the word cancer with anything they're going through. It says what cancer can't do. It can't prevent love. It can't conquer the spirit. It can't silence courage. It can't take away memories. It can't weaken your faith, and it can't defeat your hope. And so I wanted to leave you with that. And I thank you, James, for having me on here and letting me to share my story. You know that I've been wanting to get my story out there, and I kind of just had my feet stuck and couldn't take that first step. And maybe this has helped me take that first step to be able to share my story and get out there and be able to help people. And, if there's anyone out there in your listening audience that, is going through cancer or knows somebody that's going through cancer, they can absolutely get a hold of me, and, I can mentor them or just go hold their hand or whatever they need, because I have been through it and I've been there, and I know the dark spots that it takes you, and hopefully I could be a little ray of sunshine on a cloudy day. And I wanted to give them, I have a Facebook page at Beverly Vaughan. I have a Twitter at Beverly K. Vaughan, and my email is beverlyKvaughan@gmail.com. And thank you for letting me share my story.
Yeah, and you just want to spell Vaughan for them?
Vaughan. It's an unusual spelling. There is an A-N.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to make sure that we got it right, so that everybody will get that. And I'll have this in the show notes. This will be cashcarconvert.com/026. Again, cashcarconvert.com/026. So with that, I really appreciate everybody listening, and I'll look forward to speaking to you guys next week. All right, well, welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. I really enjoyed having Beverly on, and in fact, normally at this point it's just me on, but actually she's still on, and there's a reason for that. So let me start by having her go through her piece of this, and then I'll close it with my piece and see if it doesn't all make sense as to how this whole thing came together. So Beverly, why don't you tell us what happened this weekend?
Okay, I went to the movie theater to see Heaven is for Real. After leaving the movie theater, we all went to the restroom, and as I was coming out of the restroom, we had went with some friends, and one of the friends we were with was engaged in talking to an elderly man, and this man was a friend of his that he hadn't seen for quite a while. And so we all got in a circle, and we were standing at the movie theater, and we were just in the lobby, and we were just talking about the movie, and he was saying that it was the little boy in the movie was a miracle, and so of course I boldly said, I'm a miracle. I had cancer, and I'm a survivor. Well, at that point, his eyes like lit up, and he looked at his friend, which is a mutual friend of ours, and he said, this wasn't a chance meeting. And I kind of looked at him, and he put his hand on my shoulder pretty firmly, and he started praying over me. And he said, God, I know that she's struggling with getting her word out, that she is a survivor, and she in fact needs to empty her heart and give this gift that she's been given, a survivorship away, and allow other people to, allow it to help other people. And I was standing there like in awe of what was happening, and he continued to pray, and he said, she's afraid of failure. And I was sitting there thinking, how does he know that I'm afraid of failure? And he said, help her to move her feet and take that first step along her journey to help people, and get out there and tell her story, and if people want to talk to her, let them talk to her, and she's going to make mistakes, but give her the strength to know that it's going to be okay, and she's just got to start the journey and be with her along her journey. And I was, at that point, I was like overwhelmed, because I knew that you were the only one that I had talked to a week or two ago about how my feet were planted firmly, and I knew that it was just that one step that I was going to have to take in order to get me moving and to share my story and get out there to where I could talk to people. But, I was just having trouble taking the first step. And for him to have prayed over me and actually said, help her take that first step, I knew that it was an intervention by God, that it was more than just a chance meeting.
That's really good. And when was that?
That was actually on April 18th.
Okay. So a week ago, so this just very past Sunday, I was trying to do a podcast this week, which was really going to be a solo show, and I was going to do it on why. I felt like people, they don't have a big enough why, and that's why they can't make a change in their life around their cars. A lot of people I talk to, they've got a reason why they don't fit the mold, why they can't get rid of their car payments and get a car that they could buy for cash. So I kept thinking, well, they would if they had a big enough why. And so I was going to do an episode about that, and I just could not get it to come together. I tried, getting all the show prep ready, and mentally I just couldn't make it happen. And so Sunday morning I was thinking about it, and it was before my wife and I went to church, and I was talking to her, and just out of the blue it hit me. I said, I'm going to ask Beverly to be on my show and tell her story, because I said few people have been through a more uphill battle in their life than what she had. And my wife, Jennifer, said, yeah, you should absolutely do that. And so I knew that Beverly had been hesitant to really get her story out there. So I really debated about whether I should reach out to her and how I should approach her about it. And finally, I sent her a text message this week asking her if she would consider telling her story on my show. And she came back and agreed that she would do it. And when we had a subsequent phone call to kind of talk about it and kind of confirm the plans and those sorts of things, she shared with me this story. And so I feel like God put that in my heart to have her on the show. I had never thought about having her on the show prior to this. I mean, I knew her story. I knew how amazing it was, but she's my sister, and I just kind of think of her that way, and I don't think about that time all that often. So it was unusual in the least for me to have this thought that she had this wonderful story that she should share with everybody. So I was very pleased that she agreed to be on, but I think really God worked through her and I in this case to bring this together and make it happen. And I hope that there are a lot of people, not only with debt issues or money problems or other kinds of addictions or whatever, but also people who are dealing with cancer or other illnesses that will draw strength from this. And she's given you all the contact information. That will be linked up in the show notes, again, at cashcarconvert.com/026. And I'll put all that in there, and you'll be able to reach out to her. And I would encourage you to do that. If this episode touched you in any way, please do. It's such a blessing to hear from the listeners, and in this case, you can be an encouragement to her to continue to get her story out there and help other people know that they have the strength to survive if they're willing to reach down inside and really fight. So again, Beverly, I want to thank you for being on, and I appreciate you sharing that aspect of the story as well. Because when you told me that, I was flabbergasted. It was quite a shock.
That's amazing.
So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will wrap up the show, and I'll just remind you to please go out to iTunes and leave a rating and review. This helps the show get noticed in iTunes. Subscription also is very important to getting noticed and getting moved up in the rankings in iTunes, which will give more people an opportunity to listen to the show. So if you've been a listener and you haven't done that, please go out and consider doing that. So I appreciate all of you guys listening, and again, I want to thank Beverly very much for coming on and sharing her story. And with that, folks, I'm going to wrap up, and again, we'll chat with you guys next week. Thank you.